Hey guys, tonight we are stepping back into the America of the 1880s. Picture yourself walking down a dusty street, the wooden planks beneath your boots creaking with every step. The air is thick with the smell of horse manure and coal smoke, and somewhere in the distance a blacksmith is hammering at his forge. A stagecoach rattles past, the driver shouting at his team while passengers bounce like popcorn in a kettle. You probably won't survive this decade. Between questionable medicine, dangerous jobs, and fashion that could practically suffocate you. But at least you'll have a good story to tell before you collapse. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love for you to comment with your location and the time where you are watching this from. It's always fun to see how far these late night rambles travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice when you arrive in an 1880s town is that everything feels both hurried and slow at the same time. Horses clop along uneven cobblestones, their drivers muttering, while shopkeepers call out the day's deals. The general store has barrels stacked high with flour, coffee beans, and candy sticks in colors so bright you wonder if they might glow in the dark. A saloon door creaks open, spilling laughter, smoke, and the faint tinkle of a piano that hasn't been tuned since Ulysses S. Grant was in office. The town is alive, but it's not quite the same rhythm you're used to. There are no engines revving or car horns honking, only the endless mix of hooves, wagon wheels, and boots against dust. Historians still argue whether these towns were more communal than our modern lives, since everyone knew your business within 5 minutes of you arriving. Privacy was not exactly a selling point here. You pass the sheriff's office, where a wanted poster curls in the wind. The reward money sounds generous until you remember that actually chasing a bandit means leaving behind the safety of civilization. Most folks here stick to safer ambitions, like hoping the railroad expands close enough to make the town's land values rise. Speculation is half the economy and half the gossip. As you continue walking, you catch the scent of coal smoke from a small locomotive waiting at the edge of town. Railroads are the arteries of the 1880s, expanding, conquering, and tying together distant communities. There's excitement, but also a little dread. You hear an old-timer mutter that trains are scaring off the buffalo, and you know he's probably right. Still, for most settlers, the train represents possibility, letters from far away, goods from across the ocean, and maybe a chance to move somewhere new if life here doesn't pan out. Your eyes wander to the architecture. Buildings are boxy, wooden, and built fast, as though permanence isn't guaranteed. Saloons often stand out the most, 2 stories with false fronts that pretend the place is fancier than it really is. Homes sit a little farther back, small and drafty, but proudly decorated with lace curtains, or maybe a hand-painted sign proclaiming "Home Sweet Home." If you look closely, you'll spot mismatched boards and windows that rattle in their frames. Comfort isn't guaranteed, but making do is practically the town motto. And then there's the fashion. Oh, the fashion. You spot women in bustles that make walking look like a sport, and men in bowler hats who sweat through their collars while pretending it's no big deal. Dust clings to everything no matter how hard you try to shake it off. You might feel underdressed in your simpler clothes, but don't worry. Even the fanciest frock here has probably been mended half a dozen times already. A boy selling newspapers shouts headlines about a distant strike in Chicago, or a new miracle invention unveiled by some tinkerer named Edison. You glance at the paper and realize that half the stories are a strange mix of earnest facts and wild exaggerations. Truth travels slowly, and embellishment fills the gap. A quirky tidbit. Sometimes editors just invented colorful details because they knew readers wanted entertainment more than accuracy. Fake news, it seems, isn't new at all. As you wander, you notice how quickly your senses are overwhelmed. The 1880s are noisy in a different way. Less machine hum, more human chaos. Boots shuffle, dogs bark, someone yells at a mule refusing to budge, but beneath it all, there's a rhythm that lulls you if you let it. The town may be messy, but it breathes with the energy of people building a world from scratch. You pause at a corner, leaning against a hitching post, and just take it in. Dust, laughter, complaints, hopes. It's all woven together in this peculiar patchwork. And whether you're here to settle, to trade, or just to pass through, the 1880s have already wrapped their dusty, stubborn arms around you. Morning arrives in the 1880s with no alarm clock, but with plenty of noise. You stir awake in a small wooden house that creaks as the wind pushes through gaps in the boards. Roosters have no respect for your sleep schedule, and somewhere outside a neighbor is already chopping wood, each thud echoing like a drumbeat through the quiet dawn. Inside, the chill clings to your nose, and you instinctively pull the blanket closer. Central heating is a dream of the future. Here, you rely on yesterday's fire, banked in the stove overnight, and hope it hasn't gone out completely. Your bedroom is simple. A bed stuffed with straw or maybe horsehair if you're lucky, a chamber pot tucked discreetly under the frame, and a washstand with a porcelain bowl and pitcher. You shuffle to it, splash icy water on your face, and wonder if you'll ever truly wake up. People in this era believe that cold water shocks you into health. Historians still argue whether it actually helped or just gave everyone chapped skin. Either way, you're awake now, and that's the point. Stepping into the kitchen, you're greeted by the smell of biscuits baking in an iron stove and maybe the faint bitterness of chicory coffee. The air is smoky because ventilation is more of a suggestion than a reality. The stove is the beating heart of the home, but it also demands constant attention. You'll spend a good chunk of your day chopping wood, hauling coal, or coaxing stubborn flames to life. And don't even think about wasting kindling. Firewood is currency, as essential as flour or bacon. If you're in a rural setting, your morning chores don't wait for breakfast. You might have to fetch water from the pump, which involves braving the chill in your long nightshirt and hoping the handle isn't frozen. A bucket of water is heavier than it looks, and you learn quickly not to slosh it on your bare feet unless you enjoy starting the day with numb toes. Inside, the family gathers. The table isn't fancy, rough wood, maybe patched with a cloth, but it's where everything happens: eating, homework, sewing, even neighborhood gossip when visitors drop by. Breakfast itself might be biscuits with molasses, cornmeal mush, or fried salt pork if the pantry allows. Milk, if you've got a cow that cooperated this morning, adds a little luxury. Otherwise, it's just coffee, weak enough to see the bottom of the cup, but strong enough to keep you moving. Children don't linger long because school awaits, shoes are laced, books are grabbed, and little feet shuffle out the door. Parents sigh in relief, or perhaps in worry, depending on how rowdy the classroom teacher is rumored to be. You, on the other hand, take a moment to just breathe in the smoky, flower-scented air, grateful for at least one meal before facing the day. One quirky detail of the 1880s morning routine is how much labor goes into looking respectable. You can't just throw on sweatpants. Women layer corsets, petticoats, and bustles before even stepping outside. Men wrestle with stiff collars and suspenders, trying to look dignified even if their shirts haven't been laundered properly in weeks. Laundry day is a full-body workout involving boiling water, lye soap, and enough scrubbing to peel the skin right off your knuckles. You start to understand why everyone rewore their clothes far more times than we would dare. Historians still argue whether people in the 1880s smelled worse than we imagine, or whether our modern obsession with deodorant makes us unfair critics. Either way, your morning wash is a quick splash, and you hope the scent of wood smoke covers the rest. For many families, mornings also mean livestock care. Chickens cluck impatiently for feed, cows bawl for milking, and pigs grunt with the expectation of scraps. A farm family's breakfast table doesn't get set until the animals have had theirs, and you soon realize that the rhythm of life here revolves around creatures with wings, hooves, or bristly snouts. Once the animals are tended, you finally get to sip coffee again, though it's gone lukewarm by now. Maybe you spread molasses on leftover cornbread, or dunk a biscuit to soften it. The food is simple, but it sticks to your ribs, and you'll need it because the day will not cut you any slack. You glance at the mantle clock, ticking just slightly offbeat, and realize it's time to face the larger world. Morning in the 1880s doesn't ease you gently into the day. It pushes you out the door, dusty boots and all, reminding you that survival here isn't about comfort, it's about persistence. And so you sling on your worn coat, tuck your hands against the cold, and prepare to meet whatever the 1880s throws your way next. You begin the slow, stubborn ritual of dressing for the 1880s. Forget the lazy luxury of rolling out of bed and slipping into sweatpants. Here, clothing is both an ordeal and a declaration of social standing. Every button, hook, and lace tells the world who you are and how much effort you're willing to spend on simply being presentable. If you're a man, the first layer is your shirt, which isn't the casual button-up you might picture. It's long, more like a tunic, often tucked into trousers, and sometimes even doubling as nightwear. Over that, you wrestle with suspenders that snap uncomfortably against your shoulders, reminding you that belts haven't really caught on yet. Next come trousers, stiff and often itchy from wool. The fabric is durable, but it also feels like a personal vendetta against sensitive skin. A waistcoat follows, buttoned up snugly, partly for warmth, partly because fashion demands it. Then, of course, comes the jacket and the bowler hat, perched at a jaunty angle even if you feel like collapsing under all the layers. Women have it even rougher. Step 1, the corset. It cinches the waist, supports the posture, and guarantees you'll take shallow breaths for the rest of the day. You tug on petticoats, plural, not singular, each one a fresh layer of fabric adding both weight and volume. Then comes the bustle, that curious padded contraption strapped to the back of the waist to create a silhouette that can only be described as furniture-inspired. Finally, a skirt or dress, which often brushes the ground and gathers dust like a determined collector of dirt. Gloves, hats, and parasols complete the look, leaving you wondering if dressing each morning counts as cardio. Spoiler, it does. The quirky part? Not everyone could afford this parade of fashion. In smaller towns, practicality often triumphed. A simple cotton dress or work shirt did the trick, patched repeatedly until the original fabric was more memory than cloth. But even the humblest folks knew the importance of appearances. Sundays or special gatherings meant digging out the good clothes, carefully stored away and worn sparingly, like fragile treasures. Historians still argue whether the rigid clothing styles of the 1880s were about genuine beauty ideals or about social control, keeping people literally bound by fabric. Either way, it's clear that fashion was less about comfort and more about declaring your place in society. Your clothing announces your class before you open your mouth, and woe betide the person whose shoes are too worn or whose dress is out of season. The comedy of it all is how impractical most outfits were for daily life. Imagine trudging across muddy streets in a skirt the size of a circus tent or hauling lumber in a starched collar that chafes your neck. Yet somehow people managed. In fact, they carried themselves with a kind of practiced elegance, as though enduring discomfort were itself a form of pride. In wealthier households, getting dressed wasn't even a solo task. Servants might help lace corsets, polish boots, or brush hats, turning the morning into a team sport. For everyone else, it was a clumsy wrestling match with hooks and buttons. You mutter under your breath as you jab yourself with a pin and wonder how many fashion designers secretly hated humanity. Despite the impracticality, there is a strange charm to the outfits. A woman in her bustle dress, carrying a parasol, looks like she's floating, even if she's sweating underneath. A man in his bowler hat and waistcoat seems distinguished, even if his socks have holes. It's a shared illusion, everyone pretending that elegance is easy, while secretly praying they don't trip on their own hem or pop a corset seam mid-conversation. Of course, children are not spared. Boys are dressed in miniature versions of men's clothing, stiff collars included, while girls are decked out in dresses that make climbing trees nearly impossible. Still, kids being kids, they manage. Somewhere down the street, you spot a little girl with her bustle tied sideways because she insisted on doing it herself, and a boy scuffing his shiny shoes on purpose just to annoy his mother. Some things never change. Once you're finally dressed, you catch a glimpse of yourself in a cloudy mirror. You look respectable, perhaps a little suffocated, but respectable nonetheless. And as you straighten your collar or adjust your skirt, you realize that these layers are more than clothing. They're armor against judgment, against gossip, even against the cold. Fashion might itch and pinch, but it also gives you the confidence to step out into the world, chin lifted just slightly higher. Still, you can't help but think, whoever invented sweatpants was a genius centuries ahead of their time. You make your way into the kitchen, the true beating heart of the household. Forget shiny countertops or humming appliances. The 1880s kitchen is a smoky, bustling, soot-smudged theater of survival where every meal feels like a small performance. The iron stove dominates the room, hulking in the corner like a temperamental beast that eats wood and spits ash. You spend half your morning coaxing it to the right temperature because unlike a modern oven, there's no handy little dial. You judge by the sound of the fire, the color of the flames, and the wisdom of whoever has burned their fingers the most over the years. Breakfast begins with biscuits, perhaps mixed from flour that clumps in humid weather and cut with lard because butter is too precious to waste before supper. Coffee bubbles weekly, sometimes made from real beans but more often from roasted chicory root, giving it a taste that makes you sigh and pretend it's good enough. On lucky mornings, you might fry salt pork, greasy, smoky, and bracing. If you're truly fortunate, there's a molasses to drizzle on cornbread. If you're not, well, porridge it is. Cooking in this era is labor disguised as routine. Before the first pot is stirred, you've fetched water from the pump, chopped wood for the stove, and wiped soot off yesterday's pots. Utensils are heavy iron, and everything seems to require arm muscles strong enough to wrestle a mule. You stir with spoons that feel like clubs, lift kettles that double as weights, and flip biscuits with the delicacy of a blacksmith. Children hover, hoping to snatch scraps, while you guard the frying pan like a dragon protecting treasure. Quirky fact, some households kept a pot of stew simmering endlessly, day after day, tossing in whatever scraps appeared. It was called perpetual stew. And though it sounds questionable, it saved time, fuel, and sanity. Historians still argue whether these stews actually tasted good or if families simply got used to the ever-evolving flavor of mystery soup. In wealthier households, breakfast might be an elaborate spread of eggs, fruit, and toast carefully trimmed, but in most homes it's quick, hearty, and designed to fuel bodies for long days of labor. Children scarf down food before school, men grab bites before heading to fields or factories, and women, after cooking everything, often eat last, hurriedly, before tackling laundry or sewing. The smells linger. Smoke from the stove mingles with the yeasty warmth of biscuits, the tang of bacon grease, and the faint metallic edge of water hauled from an iron pump. It's both comforting and slightly oppressive. You imagine how clothing, hair, and even skin absorb this aroma until every family member carries the scent of their kitchen like an invisible signature. And then there's the cleanup. No handy faucet, just another trip to the pump. You pour water into a basin, scrub with lye soap that dries your hands to parchment, and pray you don't drop the heavy pan on your foot. The stove needs tending, ashes scooped, firewood stacked, all before the next meal, because in this decade, cooking isn't an event, it's your day job. You steal a bite of a still warm biscuit, its edges crunchy, its center tender, and for a moment you forgive the labor. You sip the bitter chicory brew and almost convince yourself it's coffee. And you realize in a world without drive-thrus or microwaves, breakfast isn't about convenience. It's about grounding yourself in routine, about shaping the day with a ritual that's both wearying and comforting. You wipe your hands on your apron or your trousers, if you're less refined, and glance toward the door. Outside, the day is waiting, full of chores, noise, and perhaps a little mischief. But for now, the stove hums softly, the biscuits cool on the table, and you've survived another 1880s morning meal. Not glamorous, but definitely grounding. You walk along the dirt road toward the schoolhouse, your boots kicking up little puffs of dust with each step. The morning air still carries a trace of wood smoke from breakfast stoves, and children chatter all around you, clutching slates, books tied with string, and tin lunch pails that rattle with biscuits or maybe an apple if the orchard was kind this season. The schoolhouse itself is plain, a simple wooden building, one room only, standing a bit lopsided as if it's already tired of holding so many restless minds. A bell hangs outside, rung with vigor by whichever unlucky child the teacher assigns. Its clang isn't exactly musical, but it does the job, dragging kids from fields, porches, or hiding spots where they'd rather linger. Inside, you squeeze into a long wooden bench at a desk carved with the initials of generations before you. The room smells of chalk dust, lamp oil, and ink. Windows creak open to let in light, though the breeze also brings in flies that seem determined to attend class too. At the front, the teacher stands with a ruler in one hand and a copy of McGuffey's Reader in the other. That ruler, by the way, is not just for pointing at the board. It's a disciplinary device, sharp against knuckles and egos alike. You open your slate and slate pencil, the scratching noise filling the room like the chirp of crickets. Lessons move quickly, reading aloud in turn, arithmetic done on the board, geography recited by rote. If you stumble, you feel the heat of every classmate's stare, plus the teacher's sigh. Still, there's a rhythm to it, and when everyone chants multiplication tables in unison, the room hums like a strange mathematical choir. Historians still argue whether these one-room schools truly provided equal education or whether they simply reinforced who already had advantages. Farm kids often missed days for chores, while wealthier children had tutors at home. Yet, the fact remains. These humble rooms shaped countless lives, teaching not just reading and numbers, but the patience of sitting still and the art of not crying when your hand gets smacked for sloppy handwriting. The quirky detail: some teachers were barely older than their students. A girl of 17 might stand at the front, teaching boys only a year or two younger than she was. Authority was often borrowed, worn like an oversized coat, and discipline enforced as much by community expectation as personal confidence. At recess, the world changes. Children tumble outside, running wild with hoops, marbles, or the simple joy of tag. Girls in long dresses try not to trip. Boys scuff their shoes in the dirt, and you can almost forget the ruler-wielding figure waiting inside. The bell rings again, cutting short the laughter, and everyone shuffles back reluctantly, cheeks flushed and hair wild. You notice the absence of luxuries, no notebooks to waste, no endless supply of pencils. Everything is precious. A single reader might be shared among several students, and lessons are half memory, half repetition. Chalk dust clings to your sleeves, and you suspect you'll carry the faint scrape of slate pencil under your nails until supper. And yet there's pride here too. Parents beam when their children learn to write their names, when they can read passages aloud at church, when they return home quoting lines from history. Education feels fragile, precarious, but deeply valued, like a flame carefully shielded from the wind. By the end of the day, your back aches from the hard bench, your head is full of recited facts, and your hands sting from holding the slate too long. But you've survived, you've learned, and you've earned the right to kick up dust on the road home, dreaming of supper and maybe sneaking in a game before chores call. The school bell's echo fades behind you, but the day is far from over. Back home, the real curriculum begins. Farm chores. You swap the stiff benches and slate pencils for muddy boots and a pitchfork that feels heavier than your arm. The air smells of hay, manure, and the faint sweetness of grain, and you quickly realize that in the 1880s, animals set the schedule more firmly than any clock. First stop, the cow. She's waiting in the barn, lowing impatiently, her breath steaming in the cool air. You sit on a three-legged stool, press your head against her warm side, and attempt to coax milk into a tin pail. If you're lucky, the stream hisses steadily, frothing white and fragrant. If you're not, she swishes her tail right into your face or plants her hoof in the bucket, undoing 20 minutes of effort in one muddy splat. You mutter a word your teacher wouldn't approve of. Next come the chickens. They cluck and scatter, offended by your very presence, but you persist. You reach beneath one particularly cranky hen and retrieve an egg still warm. She gives you a glare that suggests you've stolen her life's work. Geese patrol nearby, hissing like feathered demons, and you begin to suspect they are the true rulers of the barnyard. Historians still argue whether farm children actually found joy in these routines, or if nostalgia has polished the drudgery into charm. But the facts are clear. Every member of the household, even the youngest, contributed to keeping animals fed and fences mended. A farm wasn't just a place to live. It was a breathing, mooing, clucking organism that consumed endless labor. The quirky bit: some families gave their cows or pigs grandiose names, Queen Bessie, Sir Oinks-a-Lot, as if elevating them softened the blow of butchering season. You can't help but laugh when you hear a farmer sternly scolding Duke Henry for knocking over the slop bucket. There's hay to pitch, troughs to fill, and fences to patch with whatever wood scraps you can find. Your hands grow calloused and your back aches, but the rhythm becomes oddly soothing. The scrape of the pitchfork, the crunch of straw underfoot, the steady thump of a cow's tail. It's a farmyard symphony, chaotic yet grounding. As the sun tilts lower, painting the barn in golden light, you pause to catch your breath. Sweat beads on your forehead, dust clings to your sleeves, and your stomach rumbles in anticipation of supper. You lean against the fence, watching a calf wobble on new legs, and despite the blisters, you feel a quiet pride. Chores in the 1880s don't just feed animals. They tether you to the land, teaching patience, resilience, and the art of laughing when a goat chews your hat. You wipe your hands on your trousers, shake straw from your hair, and head back toward the house, satisfied you've survived another round in the barnyard battlefield. You trudge back from the barnyard, boots caked in mud, and drift toward the heart of small-town social life, the general store. If the schoolhouse is where you learn facts, And the barnyard is where you learn patience. The store is where you learn every piece of gossip your neighbors have decided to share or invent. The building itself isn't much to look at, just a wide front wooden structure with a bell on the door and a porch where old men nurse pipes and lean back in chairs that creak as much as their joints. You step inside and are instantly hit by a mingling of scents: coffee beans, molasses, leather, tobacco, and maybe a hint of kerosene oil. Barrels line the floor, shelves sag with goods, and behind the counter stands the storekeeper who somehow knows everyone's business before you even open your mouth. You wander past sacks of flour stacked like fortresses, bins of nails and tools, and a glorious glass jar of striped candy sticks. 5 cents a piece if you're flush with fortune, 1 cent if you're lucky enough to find change in your pocket. You can't resist pressing your nose close, pretending you're deciding while secretly just inhaling the sugary scent. At the back, neighbors trade news. A farmer complains about blight on his corn. A woman mentions her cousin moving west to Kansas. A man speculates loudly that the new railroad line might pass close enough to double land values. Historians still argue whether general stores were truly democratic spaces or subtle hierarchies in disguise. After all, your credit here depends on your reputation, and reputations can crumble faster than a stale biscuit. The quirky part? Some stores doubled as post offices, barbershops, or even informal banks. Need to send a letter? You hand it across the counter with your purchase of coffee grounds. Need a trim? The same man who measures your nails might lather your chin with shaving soap. It's a one-stop shop centuries before strip malls and online carts. The real currency here, though, is conversation. You overhear whispers about a neighbor's daughter being seen walking home with a certain young man, which earns a few knowing chuckles. Someone else complains about the price of kerosene lamps rising again. The talk drifts easily from crops to politics to the latest miracle tonic promising to cure everything from baldness to melancholy. You smirk, knowing full well most of those bottles are more alcohol than medicine. You pick up a few essentials: flour, salt, maybe a twist of tobacco if you're inclined, and linger a moment longer just to bask in the hum of voices. The general store isn't just commerce, it's the pulse of the town. Without it, news would crawl, rumors would stagnate, and life would feel far lonelier. As you step back onto the porch, the late afternoon sun casts long shadows across the street. A boy kicks a ball made of rags. A dog trots past, proudly carrying someone's shoe, and the men in their creaky chairs tip their hats in lazy acknowledgement. You walk away with your bundle of supplies, your pockets a little lighter, and your head buzzing with the sweet, silly, and serious threads of town life you've just absorbed. You hear it before you see it: the low, thunderous rumble of iron wheels, the hiss of steam, the sharp cry of a whistle slicing through the afternoon air. The railroad runs near town, and today you decide to climb aboard to see what all the fuss of this 1880s marvel is about. The train waits at the depot, squat and hulking, a beast of black iron breathing clouds of smoke that curl skyward like storm clouds. Passengers mill around the wooden platform, farmers with crates of chickens, traveling salesmen with suitcases full of miracle products, and families clutching bundles tied with twine. Everyone looks both weary and hopeful, as if the train might either deliver them to fortune or swallow them whole. You climb aboard and sink into a stiff wooden seat polished by countless travelers before you. The air inside smells of coal, sweat, and the faint tang of oranges carried by a vendor with a basket. Your clothes pick up soot instantly, little black smudges that will stay with you like souvenirs. You peer out the window as the whistle shrieks and the train lurches forward, jerking so abruptly that you nearly bump your head on the seat in front of you. The countryside begins to blur, fields rolling past in streaks of green and brown, barns tilting in the distance, telegraph poles ticking by like the hands of a clock. The rhythm of the train is hypnotic. Clack, 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 a lullaby of steel that makes your eyelids heavy even as your bones rattle with each jolt. Historians still argue whether the railroads were truly the great equalizers they were advertised to be. For settlers, they promised progress and connection. For native communities, they meant intrusion and disruption. For towns, they could bring prosperity or bypass them entirely, leaving them to fade into obscurity. But for you, in this moment, it's simply an unforgettable ride. The quirky part? Train travel was noisy and messy, yet oddly social. Passengers chatted with strangers as if they were neighbors, trading stories about crops, politics, or the latest dime novel. A salesman in a loud plaid suit might try to convince you his tonic cures baldness, gout, and shyness all at once. Meanwhile, a boy wanders down the aisle selling peanuts wrapped in paper cones, his voice carrying above the din. You press your hand against the glass, watching smoke trail behind the locomotive like a great banner. The conductor strides down the aisle, punching tickets with a snap that feels both reassuring and stern. A woman across the way adjusts her bonnet while her baby gnaws on a rag soaked in sugar water to quiet its cries. A farmer snores loudly 2 rows back, his hat tilted over his eyes, oblivious to the chaos. The train barrels forward and you feel a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The landscape slides past, familiar and yet fleeting, as though you're borrowing glimpses of other lives. And even though soot smudges your cheeks and the seat numbs your back, there's a thrill in knowing you're part of something modern, something powerful, something that promises the future is already here. By the time the train screeches to a halt at the next depot, your ears ring from the whistle, your clothes are dusted black, and your stomach is growling, yet you can't help but grin. You've just ridden the great iron horse of the 1880s, and for all its rattles and smoke, it feels a little bit like magic. You step off the train and straight into the belly of a city factory, where the hum of progress is less a hum and more a deafening roar. The 1880s urban landscape is stitched together by smokestacks and brick walls, their chimneys coughing out black plumes that turn the sky a permanent shade of gray. You shuffle inside, joining a line of men, women, and even children who are here not for glamour but for the grind. The first thing you notice is the noise. Machines clatter, belts snap, gears grind, so loud you can barely hear yourself think. The air smells of oil and sweat, metallic dust and damp wool. The floor is slick, the lighting dim, and you're quickly aware that your fingers are just one careless moment away from becoming part of the machinery. Safety regulations? Not yet invented. If you survive the day with all your limbs intact, you count yourself lucky. You take your place at a textile loom, your hands moving fast to feed thread through shuttles. It's repetitive, mind-numbing, but requires absolute focus. A sneeze at the wrong moment could ruin a yard of fabric, or worse. Historians still argue whether factory work truly represented opportunity or exploitation. For immigrants arriving with little but hope, the factory meant wages and survival. For reformers, it was a prison of soot and noise that swallowed lives whole. Both, of course, are true. Quirky fact, some factories employed children so small they crawled under machines to clean lint from gears while they were still running. It sounds absurdly reckless today, but in the 1880s, every extra wage, however tiny, kept food on the table. You glance at a boy no older than 10, his fingers stained with oil, his eyes heavy with exhaustion, and you silently promise yourself not to complain when your own shift stretches past 12 hours. Break time is brief, just enough to eat a hunk of bread or cold potato from your tin pail. Around you, workers swap stories. A rumor about a strike in New York, a tale of someone who lost 2 fingers last week, and the ever-present grumble about bosses who sit in warm offices while the rest of you choke on soot. A salesman wanders by, hawking nerve tonics in brown bottles, swearing they'll give you energy. You're half convinced it's just alcohol and sugar, but you're too tired to care. The machines start up again, and the building shakes like a restless beast. Your back aches from standing, your ears ring with constant pounding, and your hands are raw from thread burns. Yet there's also a strange pride here. Every yard of fabric, every barrel of nails, every pound of steel, your labor is weaving the very bones of this growing nation. When the final whistle blows, you stagger outside, ears buzzing in the sudden relative quiet. The city air is hardly clean, but compared to the factory floor, it feels almost refreshing. You stretch, rub your sore shoulders, and wonder how anyone can do this day after day without collapsing. Still, you join the stream of workers heading home, soot-covered, weary, but stubbornly alive. You leave the smoky city behind and head west, drawn by the dream of open skies and fresh beginnings. The 1880s frontier promises adventure, though it mostly delivers dust, rattlesnakes, and an endless supply of boredom. You climb into a creaking wagon, its canvas top flapping in the wind, and the horses lurch forward, setting you on a journey across landscapes that stretch wider than your imagination. The road is hardly a road at all, more a suggestion carved by wagon wheels and stubborn determination. Each bump rattles your bones, and you quickly learn to hold on to the wooden sideboards unless you want to bounce right out. The sun beats down mercilessly, painting your neck red and your lips dry. Water becomes precious, every sip rationed with the seriousness of gold. At night, you camp beside the trail. The stars blaze overhead, sharp and countless, and for a moment you feel both tiny and infinite. Supper is beans cooked over a fire, maybe bacon if fortune smiled at the last trading post. The smoke clings to your clothes and you fall asleep on a bed of grass and rocks, praying no scorpion wanders into your blanket. The days blur together, plodding hooves, groaning wagon wheels, and the constant creak of wood. You pass through stretches of prairie where the horizon never seems to get closer, through dusty canyons that echo with your footsteps, through forests where every crack of a twig makes you wonder if it's a deer or something hungrier. Historians still argue whether frontier life was genuinely liberating or just another kind of hardship wrapped in romantic storytelling. Some families thrived, carving farms from stubborn soil, others packed up after a year broken by drought, loneliness, or sheer exhaustion. What's undeniable is the sense of gamble. Every westward trek was a roll of the dice, with fortunes and failures scattered across the land like abandoned wagon wheels. Quirky detail, tumbleweeds really do roll dramatically across the plains, though they're less menacing than they appear in movies. The real hazards are rattlesnakes sunning themselves on the path, or sudden storms that turn dust into mud thick enough to swallow wagon wheels whole. You find yourself muttering curses at both weather and wheels, and then laughing at the absurdity of yelling at inanimate objects. The wagon becomes your entire world. Children squabble in the back, someone sings to pass the time, and the canvas flaps like a heartbeat overhead. Each mile feels like a victory, each campfire like a fragile oasis. You measure progress not in grand leaps, but in surviving another day without breaking an axle or losing a cow. By the time you spot a settlement in the distance, just a cluster of cabins and a half-built church, you feel a surge of relief. Civilization, however scrappy, means supplies, company, and maybe a chance to rest your weary bones. You roll into town dusty, sunburned, and smelling faintly of beans, but also strangely proud. The frontier isn't glamorous. It's gritty, stubborn, and exhausting. But as you step down from the wagon, legs aching, you can't help but feel the tug of possibility. Out here in the wide, wild stretch of America, the future is as open as the horizon. Gold, everyone whispers about it, dreams about it, and in the 1880s, some folks still chase it across streams and mountains as though fortune might be hiding under the very next rock. You too catch the fever and soon find yourself knee-deep in a muddy creek, swishing a battered pan back and forth until your arms ache. The sun blazes overhead, mosquitoes swarm like tiny demons, and your stomach growls, but hope keeps you rooted there, staring at the water as if it might suddenly glitter with promise. The reality is less dazzling. Most of what swirls in your pan is sand, pebbles, and disappointment. Occasionally you catch a fleck of something yellow, your heart leaps, and then you realize it's just mica, fool's gold. You sigh, toss it aside, and keep swishing. Historians still argue whether prospectors truly believed in striking it rich, or if they were simply chasing a collective daydream fueled by tall tales. What's certain is that very few walked away wealthy, and many left poorer, hungrier, and dustier than they'd arrived. The camps that spring up around these creeks are rough affairs, tents flapping in the wind, smoke from cook fires curling above, and the constant din of men arguing over claims. A stew pot bubbles with whatever scraps could be scavenged, and coffee is brewed so strong it could strip paint off a wagon wheel. Someone strums a fiddle off key, trying to lift spirits, while another man swears he's heard of a richer strike just 2 valleys over. You roll your eyes, knowing half the stories are invented after too many swigs of cheap whiskey. The quirky part? Prospectors often gave ridiculous names to their diggings: Last Chance Gulch, Hangtown Creek, or even Rattlesnake Bite Flats. It was part bravado, part humor, and part desperate attempt to make misery sound adventurous. You imagine future historians puzzling over these names, shaking their heads and chuckling. As night falls, you crawl into your damp blanket, muscles stiff from shoveling mud all day. The mosquitoes buzz their victory song around your ears, and the creek gurgles as if mocking your efforts. You wonder if tomorrow will be the day your pan actually glitters with something real. Probably not, but then again, that maybe is exactly what keeps you here. By morning, the fever hasn't left. You stumble back to the creek, pan in hand, ready to shovel and swish again. Foolish? Absolutely. But in the 1880s, chasing a dream, even a muddy, mosquito-ridden one, feels better than giving up. And so you keep at it because who knows, maybe today the mud will finally pay off. You leave the muddy creek behind and step into another world of 1880s America, the world of medicine, or at least what passes for it. Your headaches, your back throbs, and naturally you're curious what remedies exist to soothe such ailments. Spoiler, brace yourself, because medical science in this decade is as much snake oil as it is genuine progress. The town doctor's office is a modest room with wooden shelves lined in glass bottles. Some contain real medicine, quinine for fevers, morphine for pain, or digitalis for heart troubles. But many sparkle with colorful liquids whose only true ingredients are alcohol, opium, and a healthy dose of wishful thinking. You complain of fatigue, and the doctor cheerfully prescribes a tonic that tastes like peppermint schnapps but leaves you buzzing for hours. Congratulations, you're now both cured and slightly tipsy. If you're not keen on doctors, the general store has shelves full of patent medicines with names as bold as their claims. Dr. Kilmer's Swamp Root, Kickapoo Indian Sagwa, or Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup, which parents happily give their babies. Never mind that it's laced with morphine. Quirky fact, the labels promised cures for everything from baldness to bad luck, and people believed it. Historians still argue whether these tonics helped through placebo, chemistry, or just the comforting burn of high-proof alcohol. And then there are the stranger treatments. Bloodletting, though fading, still lingers in rural places with leeches applied to draw out bad humors. Some swear by electrical belts, gadgets wired to zap you back to health with little jolts. Others gulp down tonics of arsenic or mercury, which today sound like guaranteed ways to shorten your lifespan, but were once praised for restoring vigor. You stare at a bottle labeled Radical Cure for Catarrh and wonder if sneezing isn't safer after all. Dentistry? That's another adventure. Toothaches are answered with forceps and whiskey, no anesthetic in sight. You grip the chair, white-knuckled, while the dentist yanks with determination and zero sympathy. If you're lucky, you walk out with fewer teeth and a bottle of laudanum to dull the pain. If you're unlucky, well, let's just say infections had a way of finishing what the dentist started. Still, there are genuine advancements tucked amid the quackery. Germ theory is slowly gaining ground, though many doctors still scoff at the idea that invisible microbes could be causing sickness. Antiseptic surgery is spreading thanks to Joseph Lister's work, but plenty of surgeons continue operating in their street clothes, wiping hands on their aprons, then blaming miasma when patients don't survive. Progress and ignorance sit side by side, sipping tonics together. You can't help but laugh at some remedies. Feeling weak? Try a daily cigar. Doctors swear tobacco strengthens the lungs. Feeling blue? A dose of cocaine-laced wine will brighten the spirits. Nervous energy? Don't worry, there's a tonic for that too. Spoiler, it's mostly whiskey. The line between doctor and bartender is blurrier than the bottom of your tonic glass. And yet, despite the absurdity, people cling to these cures, because in a world where disease lurks in every cough, where childbirth is risky, where infections turn deadly in days, hope itself is medicine. Even if it comes bottled in a brown glass vial with a label too long to read. You leave the doctor's office, lightheaded, your pockets lighter, and your tongue numb from peppermint schnapps pretending to be a cure. You shake your head, mutter something about snake oil, and secretly hope the tonic actually works. Because in the 1880s, when your body falters, you don't have many better options. The tonic bottle is still sloshing in your pocket when you wander into the parlor, where the evening's real drama is about to begin. Courtship. Forget dating apps or texting. Romance in the 1880s is an intricate dance of calling cards, carefully timed visits, and chaperones who hover like hawks. You're about to discover that falling in love here requires as much stamina as plowing a field. It usually starts with a gentleman presenting his calling card, a small, elegant slip of paper embossed with his name. He leaves it at the home of a young lady he hopes to impress. If the card is returned folded in half, it's the 1880s equivalent of no thanks. If the family keeps it, however, he's invited for a call. That means he can stop by in the evening, sit stiffly in the parlor, and attempt to charm not just the young woman, but her entire family. The parlor itself is decorated for scrutiny, heavy drapes, patterned carpets, a piano that may or may not actually be played. You perch on a chair that feels designed to keep you upright and proper, while the young woman sits opposite, hands folded neatly in her lap. Her mother hovers nearby with embroidery, pretending to be occupied while listening to every word. Her father clears his throat meaningfully from behind a newspaper. Romance in this setting is less about whispered secrets and more about navigating a social obstacle course. Conversation topics are safe, the weather, church sermons, local gossip. Compliments must be delicate, never too forward. A slip of the tongue could spark scandal, and nobody wants their name in the rumor mill for the wrong reason. Historians still argue whether this rigid courtship ritual truly preserved morals or simply repressed natural human impulses. Either way, the rules are clear: the respectability first, feeling second. The quirky detail: some families actually used special parlor furniture designed to keep couples apart. Chairs shaped to force distance, or even courting benches with a divider down the middle. Nothing says romance quite like a wooden plank preventing your knees from touching. And if you thought holding hands was innocent, think again. Sometimes even that was considered shockingly bold. If the evening goes well, you might be invited back again. A second visit could include music. Perhaps the young woman plays a piano piece while you nod appreciatively, even if she stumbles through half the notes. Later visits might allow for a walk in the garden, though always under the watchful eyes of siblings or neighbors conveniently passing by. Privacy is rare, and every stolen glance feels like a grand rebellion. Engagements, when they happen, are family affairs. A ring is presented, announcements are made, and suddenly the whole community buzzes with excitement. Weddings are usually practical, sometimes celebrated in parlors themselves, with cakes baked by relatives and dresses that might later be altered for everyday use. Love is present, but so is pragmatism. Marriage is both romance and alliance, a weaving of families, land, and futures. And, of course, there are awkward failures. A gentleman who overstays his welcome, droning on about his farm machinery. A young woman who yawns too openly, earning a frown from her mother. The eternal presence of little brothers barging in with ill-timed jokes. You laugh quietly, realizing some things about courtship, awkwardness, nerves, family interference never truly change. When you finally rise to leave the parlor, tipping your hat, you feel oddly exhausted, not from labor, but from navigating a maze of politeness, tradition, and unspoken rules. Romance in the 1880s isn't about grand gestures. It's about subtle persistence, surviving chaperones, and hoping your calling card doesn't end up folded in half. The parlor curtains close, the courting bench creaks back into silence, and you begin to notice another current of life stirring in the 1880s, the slow but steady shift in women's roles. On the surface, the world still insists on corsets, kitchen duty, and carefully guarded reputations. Yet if you lean in closer, you'll hear the faint hum of voices plotting change, laughter mixing with determination in parlors, sewing circles, and town halls across America. Your morning might find you in a sewing circle, needles flashing as women mend clothes or piece together quilts. Outwardly, it looks domestic, but listen carefully. These stitches are accompanied by talk of wages, education, and the right to vote. One woman leans in to whisper that she attended a suffrage meeting last week. Another shares an article clipped from the newspaper about Susan B. Anthony's latest speech. The quilt becomes a tapestry of not just fabric, but ideas quietly stitched into the future. Of course, not everyone approves. Fathers, brothers, and husbands sometimes shake their heads, muttering that such nonsense distracts women from their real duties. Historians still argue whether the 1880s truly marked a turning point for women, or whether it was simply a louder continuation of centuries of quiet rebellion. Either way, the push is undeniable. You can feel it in the restless energy of conversations that refuse to stay within the lines of embroidery hoops. The quirky part? Many suffrage meetings doubled as tea parties. The clink of porcelain cups softened the radical edge of the discussions, making them more palatable to critics. Imagine sipping Earl Grey while debating property rights and political representation. It's as if caffeine and revolution were old friends. Beyond politics, women's daily routines are also shifting. More are pursuing education, some even attending universities. A few take jobs as teachers, nurses, or clerks, roles once barred from them. Dress reform movements stir as well. campaigns for looser clothing and less restrictive corsets, though fashion magazines cling stubbornly to bustles the size of small furniture. You try walking a mile in one of those contraptions and quickly realize why some women call for change. At home, debates ripple quietly over supper tables. A mother insists her daughter should learn bookkeeping instead of only cooking. A husband scoffs but secretly admires his wife's ability to balance accounts better than he does. Even in kitchens where biscuits bake and coffee simmers, the air is tinged with new ideas about independence. You walk down a street and notice the signs, a pamphlet tucked under someone's arm, a bookstore window displaying novels by women writers, a group of girls striding confidently to school. Change isn't loud, but it's steady, like a stream wearing a waystone. As the evening settles, you imagine two worlds colliding, the carefully monitored parlor with its chaperones, and the quiet radicalism of suffrage meetings over tea. Women of the 1880s live in both, balancing tradition with transformation, corsets with courage. And though the decade doesn't deliver full victory, it plants seeds, seeds that will grow, stubborn and unyielding, into a garden of rights yet to come. Night has arrived, chores are finished, and you finally get a glimpse of how the 1880s entertained itself once the lamps were lit. Forget streaming services or glowing screens. Here, leisure is stitched together from fiddles, laughter, and the occasional traveling show that makes everyone in town put on their best boots. You start in the parlor where family members gather around the piano. The keys are slightly out of tune, but that doesn't stop anyone. Someone plunks out Home Sweet Home. Children attempt to sing along, and a few adults clap on the wrong beat. The room glows with lamplight, curtains drawn tight, and for a brief moment you forget the day's blisters and dust. Music, however imperfect, feels like a balm. Step outside, and the night air is filled with another kind of sound. Fiddles and banjos at a barn dance. Neighbors cram into a wide, drafty space, the floorboards stomping under boots as couples whirl in circles. Sweat and sawdust mingle with laughter, and even those who claim they don't dance eventually get pulled into the fun. You stumble a bit, your boots catching on splinters, but nobody minds. Half the joy is in the chaos. Historians still argue whether entertainment in the 1880s was truly a relief from labor or simply another social expectation. Did people genuinely enjoy the dances and recitals, or did they feel pressured to participate? Probably both. Still, judging from the flushed cheeks and booming laughter around you, the relief is real enough tonight. The quirky part, Victorians adored parlor games, some of which sound less like fun and more like mild humiliation. Blind Man's Bluff involved stumbling around blindfolded while everyone else laughed at your missteps. Snapdragon required plucking raisins from a bowl of flaming brandy, yes, flaming, while trying not to set your hair on fire. You realize modern party games are tame in comparison. And then there are the traveling shows. A wagon rolls into town, posters pasted on every wall, a vaudeville act, a magic lantern slideshow, perhaps even a mesmerist promising to put volunteers into a trance. The whole community gathers, coins jingling in pockets, eager for novelty. You sit on a hard bench, craning your neck to see as a performer belts out jokes or balances chairs on his chin. The laughter is contagious, the applause thunderous, and for a moment the dusty little town feels like the center of the universe. Back at home, the evening might end with quiet reading by lamplight, serialized stories in magazines, dime novels filled with cowboys and outlaws, or poetry recited aloud. Children drift off mid-story, eyelids drooping, heads nodding against shoulders. The lamp flickers, shadows dance on the walls, and outside crickets provide the background score. Entertainment in the 1880s isn't flashy. It's homemade, communal, and sometimes downright silly, but it stitches people together, offering moments of joy amid long days of toil. You lean back, listening to the fading strains of a fiddle from somewhere down the road, and you think, maybe the best kind of fun is the kind you stumble into, laughter echoing through lamplight until sleep finally pulls you under. The lamplight flickers low, but your mind stays restless, so you reach for the next best thing to entertainment, the printed word. In the 1880s, newspapers and cheap paperbacks are everywhere, the lifeblood of information and imagination. You unfold a broadsheet still smelling faintly of ink, its edges smudging your fingers, and immediately you're pulled into a swirl of scandal, politics, and stories designed to stir curiosity more than clarity. The headlines scream about labor strikes in Chicago, new railroad expansions, or rumors of foreign wars. Local pages mix earnest announcements, church socials, crop prices, births and deaths, with oddities lifted from distant towns. Did a farmer in Kansas grow a pumpkin the size of a wagon? According to the paper, yes. Did a traveling preacher cure a fever with prayer and vinegar? The reporter swears it happened. Historians still argue whether these small-town newspapers reflected reality or simply entertained their readers with a blend of fact and fancy. And then there are the ads. Every page is cluttered with promises, patent medicines that cure nervous complaints, and soap that guarantees beauty, corsets light as a feather, a blatant lie, and miracle plows that supposedly double your harvest. You chuckle, wondering if anyone actually believed half these claims, then realize, of course they did. Hope sells as quickly as newsprint. Quirky fact, many households passed newspapers from hand to hand until the pages nearly disintegrated, and sometimes they weren't just for reading. Old issues lined shelves, wrapped packages, or yes, were recycled in the outhouse. Talk about full circulation. When you tire of news, you turn to the real treasure, dime novels. Printed cheaply on pulp paper, these little booklets are crammed with lurid tales of outlaws, detectives, and daring adventures. You flip through one, its cover illustration showing a mustachioed cowboy dramatically leaping from a cliff while firing 2 pistols. The story inside, half cliches, half fever dream, but entirely gripping. Children pass them secretly under school desks, and adults devour them by lamplight while pretending they're just keeping up with culture. Serial fiction fills the magazines too. Long, winding stories released chapter by chapter, hooking readers for months. You imagine someone in Ohio and someone in New York, both gasping at the same cliffhanger, waiting impatiently for the next issue. Literature becomes a shared conversation across miles, a slow-motion version of binge watching. You lean back in your chair, the paper crackling softly, the lamp humming with faint smoke. Outside, crickets chirp, and the night feels both small and endless. Words fill the silence, carrying you to cities you'll never see, into lives you'll never live. They distract you from the ache of chores, the worry of bills, the monotony of days. By the time you set the paper aside, your fingertips are blackened with ink and your head buzzes with a jumble of headlines, heroes, and half-true tales. You yawn, stretch, and smile at the thought that even in the 1880s, people loved a good story, whether it came as breaking news, scandalous rumor, or a cowboy leaping improbably off a cliff. Sunday dawns slower than other days, the town wrapped in a hush, broken only by the peal of church bells drifting across the fields. You straighten your collar, brush the dust from your shoes, and join the quiet stream of neighbors heading toward the wooden church at the edge of town. The building is plain. White clapboard siding, a steeple pointing earnestly toward the sky, and pews inside that groan like they're older than the Bible itself. You slide into a seat, the wood hard and unforgiving, and immediately realize the next 2 hours will test both your faith and your posture. The minister clears his throat, his voice booming across the room as he launches into a sermon on sin, virtue, and the importance of tithing even when money is scarce. Children fidget beside their parents, whispering or kicking the pew in front of them until they're silenced with a sharp glance. Historians still argue whether Sunday services in the 1880s were more about genuine devotion or about community surveillance. For many, church was the only social gathering of the week where everyone noted who wore what, who arrived late, and who suspiciously didn't show up at all. Faith and gossip blended seamlessly, whispered behind hymnals while the choir sang. The quirky detail? Hymnals were often shared, 2 or 3 people leaning in together to squint at the tiny print. The singing itself was heartfelt, but not always in tune. High voices shrieking, basses rumbling like wagon wheels, yet the collective sound, imperfect as it was, filled the rafters with warmth. You find yourself humming along, your voice lost in the tide of sound, and realize the beauty isn't in perfection but in participation. After the sermon comes the slow shuffle outside where the real business begins. Men gather in small knots to discuss crops and politics. Women exchange recipes and compliments, or barbs disguised as compliments, about bonnets and dresses. Children run wild in the grass, free at last, until corralled by stern parents reminding them of Sunday manners. And then, of course, the church potluck. Long tables groan under dishes of fried chicken, biscuits, pies, and mysterious casseroles whose ingredients spark polite debate. You fill your plate, grateful for the feast, and laugh as someone insists their peach pie recipe has been in the family since before the Revolution. Whether that's true or not hardly matters. The pie is delicious. As the sun climbs higher, you lean against the fence post, stomach pleasantly full, ears ringing with hymns and gossip alike. Sunday, in the 1880s, is equal parts ritual, obligation, and genuine joy. It's where faith mixes with friendship, where sermons mingle with stories, where the community takes its weekly head count. By evening, the bells are silent, the pews empty once more, and you head home with a mix of satisfaction and relief. You survived the sermon, endured the wooden pews, and even managed a second slice of peach pie. Not a bad Sabbath, all things considered. The echo of the church bell fades, and by the next week, the pier's alive with a different kind of congregation. Immigrants spilling off steamships, clutching bundles tied with twine, faces etched with both exhaustion and hope. You stand among them, inhaling a stew of smells, boiled cabbage, sweat, salt water, and coal smoke. It's not exactly pleasant, but it is unforgettable. Families cluster together, speaking in a jumble of accents, German, Italian, Polish, Yiddish, Chinese. Children cling to skirts, eyes wide at the strange bustle of the American port. The air rings with languages you don't understand, but you catch enough fragments to realize that most are whispering the same question: what happens now? Work crews guide people through inspection lines, checking papers, prodding for signs of illness. Anyone coughing too hard risks being sent back, a terrifying prospect after weeks at sea. A few slip through nervously, heads bowed, praying no one notices their fevers. Historians still argue whether these inspections were about protecting public health or simply about controlling who is deemed fit for America. Either way, the pier is thick with tension. The quirky detail? Many newcomers carried the oddest keepsakes: a jar of soil from the old country, a family Bible wrapped in cloth, or a frying pan that had already crossed oceans. You can't help but smile at the sight of a man lugging a dented accordion, determined that no matter where he ends up, he'll still make music. Past the inspections, the city looms. Streets reek of horse manure and smoke, but to newcomers they smell like possibility. Boarding houses crowd with tenants, 10 or more crammed into rooms the size of a modern closet. A meal might be bread dipped in watery stew, yet the laughter is loud, the resilience louder. Children dart through alleys barefoot, their games echoing between brick walls, while parents work at laundries, factories, or push carts, scraping together pennies that feel like gold compared to what they left behind. Some neighborhoods pulse with familiarity despite the distance. Little Italy with its bakeries and songs, Jewish quarters alive with markets and prayer, Chinese laundries humming late into the night. The sounds, smells, and flavors create mosaics of culture that the wider city sometimes resents, sometimes exploits, but cannot ignore. You sit on a stoop, sharing a crust of bread with a boy who offers you a phrase in his mother tongue. You repeat it clumsily, and he laughs, not unkindly. For a moment, the chaos softens, and you realize that this messy, crowded, noisy street is alive with possibility. By night, the tenement air grows hot and stifling. Families sleep shoulder to shoulder, dreams pressed as tightly as the bodies. The walls are thin, the floors creak, but there's hope here, a fragile but stubborn flame. And as you drift off, you think, this is what the 1880s looks like for thousands: arrival, struggle, and the quiet courage to keep building a life from almost nothing. The crowded pier and tenement streets fade behind you, and your steps carry you toward the edges of settlement, into lands where native voices still murmur, steady and insistent, even as the 1880s press hard upon them. You hear them in campfire songs, in stories whispered to children under star-thick skies, in the hush that falls when a hawk wheels overhead and someone points, quietly, to notice. You also hear sorrow, because this decade keeps a ledger: broken treaties, shrinking hunting grounds, and the government's relentless insistence that life be lived its way or not at all. You settle beside a low fire, the smoke sweet with sage, and listen. An elder traces a map in dust with a willow twig, showing where bison once blackened the prairie like a living storm. Your boots pause at the edge of his drawing. You remember the railroad you rode, the soot on your collar, and how even a whistle can sound like a claim. The elder says, the herds are nearly gone now. Bones stacked, hides sold, the great animals hunted for profit and sport and strategy. He doesn't have to explain the strategy part. You feel it in your ribs, a quiet thud, like the door of a storehouse slammed shut. A mainstream fact settles into the evening. By the 1880s, the bison are down to a scattered remnant, and with them go the rhythms of nations who followed their paths. You sit a little straighter, the way you did in that stiff church pew, but this time out of respect, not obligation. You're invited to share a bowl of stew, wild roots, a little meat that tastes deep and simple. Someone laughs that you must be careful or you'll burn your tongue. You promise to be brave, then immediately burn your tongue. You cough, sip water, and accept teasing with a grin. A small child shows you a parfleche, painted rawhide, folded into a bright geometric suitcase. She opens it with triumph, revealing a treasure, a smooth skipping stone, a shell from a river, and a scrap of ribbon scavenged from a trader's crate. The quirky detail warms you. Beauty carried in portable boxes long before valises and steamer trunks made the look fashionable. As the evening grows, the talk turns to rules, to papers, to lines on maps that outrun the horizon. The Dawes Act has come, 1887, you're told, a law that breaks tribal lands into individual allotments, a patchwork that promises citizenship like a dangling carrot while prying apart communal holdings. They say it will make us farmers, someone murmurs, as if we never knew soil. Historians still argue whether allotment was an earnest, if paternalistic plan to integrate native people into American property systems or a calculated way to open surplus land to speculators. You don't say it out loud, but after a week of listening to general store gossip and train station boasts, the second option feels closer to the bone. A young man speaks of boarding schools, of the long wagon ride, the cutting of hair that felt like a cutting of breath, the uniforms that pinched worse than any corset you wrestled into back in town. He refuses to repeat the school's motto, but you've heard it whispered, a project of remaking people by unmaking language, clothing, names. He says he learned English and penmanship and how to scrub floors until they reflected the ceiling. He says he also learned to hide his songs in the space between heartbeats. You look at your hands, the ink stains from last night's dime novel seem trivial now, the way childish smudges do beside scars. Women talk about sewing circles of their own, beadwork that stitches stories into moccasins and dresses, quills laid in careful patterns, a ledger book borrowed from a trader and filled with images of horses, hunts, thunder. You notice the dual truth, art as memory and art as defiance. You think of your new friends in town, quilts stitching politics between tea sips, and realize how often change begins on cloth. One woman smiles and says beadwork is patient. You joke that patience and you are only acquaintances. She laughs, which is generous of her. Night deepens and a drum begins, a heartbeat's cousin, steady, low. A circle forms and you keep respectfully back, aware that not every space is yours to occupy. Someone explains that dances have been watched, restricted, renamed, but that feet remember even when laws forget. A man mentions visions traveling the plains, a dance of ghosts promised to bring renewal, to fold the lost world forward again, like a parfleche opening to reveal what was kept safe. Historians still argue whether the ghost dance was primarily a spiritual revival, a social movement of resistance, or a grief song too large for translation. You listen to the beat and decide arguments sometimes miss the point the way a clumsy dancer misses the step. You ask quietly about food now that bison are gone, and you're told of gardens coaxed from tough soil, of fish pulled from thorny rivers, of trade for flour and coffee at a price that tastes like compromise. Someone offers fry bread, warm, chewy, born from government rations of flour and lard. You bite, nod, and admit it's good. You also sense the history baked in, needed from necessity rather than choice. A joke spins out. How even bad flour can turn into something worth sharing. You file that away as a lesson, along with don't boast about bravery to a pot of stew. In the firelight, a storyteller raises a palm, and the children go tidily quiet in a way that schoolmarms would envy. The tale steps out carefully, a trickster who calls the wind by its nickname, a grandmother who outsmarts a bear with nothing but a song and a straight face. Laughter darts through the circle, quick, bright, and you find yourself smiling at the timing, at the way a pause becomes its own punchline. The story's a braid, old, new, and right now. You feel it tug. You think about maps again and how your own day has been a crossing, from factory floors to open roads, from parlor games to this circle. You consider how your newspaper last night treated this land like a blank page waiting for lines, while the dust map here is already crowded with remembered footsteps. You remember how the general store served as bank, post office, rumor mill. You see how this fire serves as archive, school, and ceremony, none of it labeled, all of it lived. When the drum sleeps, the stars return to their loudness. You help carry a water bucket, careful on the path, and receive a thank you with a nod that feels like the right size, neither too big nor too small. You are bluntly, kindly reminded to shake sand from your boots before stepping into a lodge. You obey with the gravity of a newly converted believer. Your reward is another small laugh and a second piece of fry bread because lessons should be sweet whenever possible. Before you leave, the elder finishes his dust map with a single straight line, then erases it with his palm. Lines move, he says. Stories stay. You tuck that sentence somewhere safe. The way a child tucks a ribbon into a parfleche, you are not asked to understand everything, only to listen, which is harder and more necessary than it sounds. You step back toward the dim outline of the road, the sage smoke clinging to your coat, your pockets lighter than when you came except for the new weight of what you've heard. The 1880s hum on both sides of you. Telegraph wires singing news in one key, drum beats holding a slower time in another. You don't try to blend them, you let them both play, and in the space between, you walk. The night fire fades and morning finds you on a different path, toward the market square where the 1880s hums in its own everyday key. You step onto uneven cobblestones, dodging a cart that wobbles past with the wheels squeaking like an old fiddle. The smell hits you first, a riot of aromas, equal parts enticing and questionable. Salted pork sweats under the sun, fish glisten on crushed ice hauled from far away, and baskets overflow with turnips, apples, and beans, their colors dulled by dust but still inviting. Vendors call out prices in voices trained by years of competition. Fresh beans, 2 cents a scoop. Turnips, best you'll find this side of the county. Someone waves a slab of questionable cheese at you, promising it will last the winter. You politely decline because the cheese seems to be breathing on its own. You wander past barrels filled with molasses, their lids sticky, attracting flies that hum like a miniature orchestra. A boy dips his finger in when he thinks no one is looking. His mother promptly swats his ear, proving someone is always looking. Baskets of dried beans crunch under your fingertips, while sacks of flour tower like pale mountains, threatening to topple if nudged too carelessly. Historians still argue whether these markets were genuine spaces of abundance or simply barely sufficient nodes of survival. The truth is likely both. The bounty depended on the season, the weather, and your purse. For some families, market day was a chance to splurge on sugar, coffee, or spices. For others, it was a reminder of what they couldn't quite afford. The quirky detail, many towns had market gossip benches, unofficial spots where men lingered to swap rumors and women compared recipes while pretending to haggle over turnips. Markets doubled as social theaters where reputations were polished or shredded with the casual flick of a tongue. One sly comment about a neighbor's butter being a little too yellow could ripple into weeks of speculation. You pause at a stall where an older woman sells pickles out of enormous crocks. She offers you one with tongs, its crunch sharp, sour, and oddly refreshing after the dusty air. A few stalls down, a man stirs a kettle of boiled candy, pulling strands into bright sticks that sparkle in the sun. Children crowd around, eyes wide, hands tugging at their mother's skirts in silent pleas. Beyond food, the market sells everything. Bolts of calico fabric, tin cups, straw hats, even a second-hand fiddle missing a string. A farmer demonstrates a new hand-cranked corn sheller with the enthusiasm of a showman, kernels rattling into a bucket while the crowd nods approvingly. A salesman boasts about his improved churn, declaring it will have butter-making time. You raise an eyebrow. Half of forever is still a long time. By late morning, your basket is heavier, your purse lighter, and your ears full of gossip ranging from who's courting whom to whether the railroad will raise flour prices again. You nibble on a warm pretzel from a German baker's cart, salt crystals sticking to your lips, and for a moment, market day feels like a celebration instead of an errand. As you leave, a fiddler plays at the edge of the square, his bow dancing, coins clinking into a tin cup at his feet. The tune follows you down the road, weaving into the smells of pickles and molasses, into the crunch of beans in your basket, into the hum of 1880s life. Markets aren't just where you shop, they're where you taste the stubborn persistence of community. Your basket from the market rests at home, and soon you find yourself wandering toward the real curiosities of the 1880s, the marvels of new technology. For all the soot and sweat of the decade, this is also an age of invention, and people can't stop buzzing about gadgets that promise to shrink distances, speed up work, or simply light the dark with a touch. You step into a parlor where neighbors are crowded around a wooden box with a crank, a telephone demonstration. The inventor's agent insists you can speak into one end and hear a voice in another house entirely. Skeptics scoff. Why would I want to talk to someone miles away when I can send a letter? But when a thin, ghostly voice crackles through, everyone gasps. You lean closer, half expecting a trick, half imagining a future where gossip travels faster than the church bell rings. Historians still argue whether people embraced the telephone eagerly or treated it as a noisy novelty. Either way, you can feel the thrill ripple through the room. The quirky part? Some early phone lines were strung between saloons before they reached homes or offices. Imagine calling down the street just to order another round. Next, a salesman demonstrates a typewriter, the clack of keys, the ding of the carriage return. It sounds like music and progress all at once. You sit, hesitantly tap a few letters, and grin as neat black marks appear instantly on the page. No more blotting ink or smudged handwriting. Of course, the machine is heavy enough to serve as a doorstop, but you can already see clerks, journalists, and ambitious students coveting one. And then Edison's latest wonder. A neighbor invites you to watch as a bulb glows gently, fed by wires humming with electricity. It's a soft, steady light, without smoke, without the constant need for trimming wicks or topping oil. You blink, awestruck. For a moment, the lamp seems less like a bulb of glass and more like bottled lightning. But skeptics mutter, it's dangerous, unnatural, even ungodly. What's wrong with kerosene? One man demands, though his eyebrows are still singed from last week's lamp mishap. Not every invention is glamorous. Farmers debate the merits of new reapers and seed drills, arguing whether machines will lighten their burdens or bankrupt them with costs. In towns, ice boxes appear in parlors, stocked with heavy blocks of ice dragged from lakes in winter and hauled by wagon in summer. You lift the lid, feel the cool rush, and marvel at butter still firm on a sweltering day. It's simple, but it feels like wizardry. You wander past a photographer's studio where people sit stiffly in front of cameras that look like cannons on tripods. Hold still, the photographer barks, as if anyone could smile naturally while staring at a blinding flash powder explosion. You peek at the finished tintypes, frozen faces, serious expressions, clothes carefully arranged. No selfies here, just solemn moments captured for eternity. And then, of course, the phonograph. A tinny voice crackles from a horn, singing a tune that sounds both distant and immediate, like a ghost performing in your parlor. People clap, laugh nervously, or cross themselves. You chuckle, imagining how strange it must feel to hear music without seeing the musician. A century later, it will be ordinary. Here, it feels like sorcery. You leave the demonstrations dizzy, your mind juggling the weight of possibility. Telephones, typewriters, electric lamps, phonographs, each invention a thread tugging the 1880s closer to the modern world. Yet outside, the street is still muddy, the lamplighters still climb ladders, and the blacksmith's hammer still rings. Old and new walk side by side, arguing, bargaining, and reshaping life one curious gadget at a time. The glow of Edison's lamp fades from your mind as you drift toward another kind of spectacle in the 1880s, crime and the men who claim to keep it in check. The town's streets might look sleepy in the afternoon sun, but under the surface there's always a murmur of lawlessness. Horse thieves, card sharks, saloon brawlers, and the occasional outlaw who becomes more legend than menace. You first stop at the sheriff's office, a squat wooden building with a single iron-barred cell that smells faintly of stale tobacco and despair. The sheriff himself sits with the boots propped on the desk, tin star glinting on his chest. He nods at you, then grumbles about a stolen horse reported that morning. "Third one this month," he mutters, as if horse thieves are more annoying than dangerous. In truth, a stolen horse is like losing your car, your tractor, and half your livelihood rolled into one. Punishments are severe, sometimes a noose, sometimes a bullet, but catching the culprit is the hard part. Across the state line, stories ripple about the Pinkertons, private detectives hired to chase down train robbers, union agitators, or anyone with enough of a bounty on their head. Their reputation is fierce, part detective, part mercenary, part boogeyman. Workers curse their name, businessmen praise it. Historians still argue whether the Pinkertons preserved order or trampled freedom, depending on which side of the paycheck you stood. The quirky detail? Some towns didn't bother with sheriffs at all. They elected vigilance committees, neighbors banding together to keep watch, sometimes fairly, sometimes with alarming enthusiasm. Justice could be swift, messy, and more about who shouted loudest than who was guilty. You picture a farmer, pitchfork in hand, declaring himself assistant deputy for the night, and you can't help but smirk. Saloon crime is its own theater. Inside, smoke hangs thick as gamblers slap cards on the table. Coins clink and tempers flare. A man accused of cheating is dragged outside by his collar, swearing innocence until he meets the sheriff's glare. Fistfights tumble into the street, hats flying, dust rising, while onlookers place bets on who will land the next punch. You wonder if half the sheriff's job is just separating drunks before they knock each other senseless. And then there are the big names, the train robbers, the bank bandits, the shadowy figures whose tales stretch taller with each retelling. Jesse James may be gone, but imitators keep springing up, eager to grab a headline or at least a handful of gold coins. Newspapers splash their exploits across front pages, half truth, half invention. You read one such article aloud and chuckle. Lone bandit escapes on horse faster than the wind. Faster than the wind, really? Night falls, and the sheriff makes his rounds, lantern swinging, boots crunching on gravel. He nods to you again, weary but steady. Mostly quiet tonight, he says, though you both know quiet can change with a single broken bottle or rattling gunshot. Crime in the 1880s isn't just about villains and heroes. It's about a fragile order patched together daily with grit, gossip, and the occasional polished tin star. You head home under the starlight, listening to the echo of boots on wood and wondering which will last longer, the outlaw tales or the men sworn to chase them. By day, you've seen the trains, the markets, and the sheriff's tin star, but when night settles, another layer of the 1880s creeps out. The world of strange beliefs and curious practices that hover between science and superstition. People crave explanations for life's mysteries, and when medicine, law, or reason fails, they turn to seances, ghost stories, and sciences with more imagination than evidence. You enter a parlor thick with lamplight and expectation. A group gathers around a table, hands linked, waiting for the medium to summon voices from beyond. The room is hushed, save for the occasional cough and the squeak of a chair. Suddenly the table trembles. Someone gasps. The medium's eyes roll back, and she declares a message from a dearly departed uncle. Invest in better hog feed. You bite your tongue to keep from laughing. Historians still argue whether seances were clever frauds preying on grief or genuine spiritual comfort for a nation shaken by war and loss. Either way, the spectacle fills parlors across America with equal parts wonder and suspicion. The quirky part? Some mediums use spirit trumpets, long, cone-shaped devices supposedly amplifying ghostly whispers. In practice, they were often just perfect tools for a little ventriloquism. You imagine a ghostly voice croaking, "Buy more molasses," and can't help but grin. Not all strange beliefs hide in dim parlors. Out on the streets, traveling lecturers tout phrenology, the science of reading character from the bumps on your skull. You sit reluctantly as a man with the wild hair runs his fingers over your head, declaring you generous but prone to stubbornness. You nod sagely, as if he's revealed a cosmic truth, while secretly thinking he just guessed based on your scuffed boots and suspicious smirk. Ghost stories drift like fog through the countryside. Families tell tales of lantern lights bobbing in graveyards, phantom riders galloping down dusty roads, or long-dead miners still digging in abandoned shafts. Children listen wide-eyed, clutching quilts tighter, while parents pretend to scoff. Yet you notice even the adults glance nervously at shadows when the wind howls across the fields. Superstitions weave into daily life too. Farmers consult almanacs not just for weather but for lucky planting days. Women tie red strings around babies' wrists to ward off illness. Someone swears by carrying a rabbit's foot, another insists never to sweep dirt out the back door at night. Practical? Maybe not. Comforting? Absolutely. And then there's the fascination with electricity. Some quacks sell electric belts, guaranteed to cure everything from headaches to heartbreak. You try one, feel a faint buzz, and wonder if it's doing anything beyond tickling your ribs. The salesman beams, insisting you'll feel 10 years younger by morning. You suspect he's lying, but you're too polite and too amused to argue. By the end of the evening, you've watched tables wobble, skulls examined, and amulets exchanged like secret handshakes. You step outside, the night air cool against your face, and glance up at the stars. Maybe spirits really do whisper in parlors, maybe ghosts do walk old roads, or maybe humans just can't resist spinning wonder into the gaps of what they don't understand. Either way, the 1880s are alive, not just with progress and grit, but with a restless imagination always reaching just beyond the veil. Morning comes again, and this time you're not headed to school, the barn, or the general store. Instead, you find yourself on the road, literally, and quickly realize that travel in the 1880s is less about speed and more about endurance. Every mile is an argument between your patience and the road's refusal to cooperate. You climb into a wagon bound for the next town. The wheels creak, the bench is unforgiving, and every rut in the dirt road feels like a personal insult to your spine. The horses plod forward, swishing their tails at flies, while you bounce hard enough to consider inventing shock absorbers on the spot. Historians still argue whether people genuinely became accustomed to these jarring rides or simply gritted their teeth until their molars rattled. Judging by your sore backside after 10 minutes, you lean toward the latter. When the road turns muddy, the wagon lurches to a halt, stuck fast. Everyone piles out, boots sinking into muck, pushing until the wheels squelch free. You curse under your breath, then laugh when you realize half the town has joined in, treating the ordeal like an impromptu community event. A child even cheers when the wagon finally rolls forward again, as though you've won a championship. Travel by water isn't much kinder. You step onto a steamship bound downriver, the deck vibrating under your feet as the paddle wheel churns. At first, the ride feels grand. You lean against the rail, watching the banks glide past, but soon the engine groans, smoke thickens, and your stomach starts to lurch with every sway. A boy runs past, clutching his mouth, confirming your suspicion. Seasickness is practically part of the ticket price. The quirky detail? Some passengers swore by peculiar remedies for motion sickness, nibbling raw ginger, wearing tight belts around the stomach, or even staring at the horizon through a colored glass. None seem to work, though laughing at the attempts offers a little distraction from your own queasiness. Rail travel, you already know, brings soot in your teeth and rattles in your bones, but even that pales next to the ordeal of stagecoaches. Picture 6 strangers crammed into a wooden box on wheels, knees knocking, dust swirling in through canvas flaps. The driver cracks his whip, and you bounce along like dice in a cup. Conversation ranges from awkwardly polite to awkwardly silent, punctuated by groans every time a wheel hits a rut. And then there's the ever-present worry of weather. A sudden thunderstorm soaks passengers to the bone. A snow squall turns roads into impassable sheets of ice. Travelers wrap in blankets, shiver, and tell jokes to distract themselves from frostbitten toes. At least, someone mutters, we're not walking. You're not entirely sure that's true. Walking might actually be smoother. When night falls on the road, you stop at a wayside inn. The beds are narrow, the straw mattresses lumpy, and you're expected to share with a stranger if rooms are scarce. Snores rattle the walls, fleas wage war on ankles, and the chamber pot sits ominously in the corner. Yet after the day's jolts and rattles, even this prickly rest feels like luxury. Travel in the 1880s is slow, messy, uncomfortable, and yet strangely charming. You step down from a wagon, steamship, or stagecoach aching all over, but also a little proud. Every arrival feels like an earned victory, every mile a small triumph over dust, mud, and motion. You shake straw from your hair, stretch your stiff legs, and think, maybe the journey really is the adventure, even when your ankles may never forgive you. At last, evening settles once more, and you drift through the streets of the 1880s with a softer step. Lamps glow faintly in windows, smoke curls lazily from chimneys, and the bustle of the day has thinned into a quiet hum. You've walked through farms and factories, schoolhouses and saloons, markets, parlors, and even the dusty frontier. Now the town itself seems to be exhaling, easing into rest. You pass a house where someone strums a fiddle, the tune slow and sweet. spilling into the night air like a lullaby. Children tumble sleepily onto quilts, mothers murmur last words over mending baskets, and fathers polish boots in silence, their minds already halfway to tomorrow's work. Somewhere down the street, a dog barks once, then curls against the stoop, content. Inside your own room, you light a lamp and sit for a moment, letting your eyes wander over the objects around you, the chair that wobbles but holds, the stove still faintly warm, the books and newspapers stacked in untidy piles. You realize each thing, every scrape, every smudge of soot, is a piece of the 1880s you've carried with you. Historians still argue whether this decade should be remembered as progress or hardship, as invention or exploitation. But sitting here, you feel it more as a patchwork quilt, bright in places, worn in others, stitched together with stubborn thread. A country still stretching, still stumbling, but refusing to stop. The quirky detail? Even bedtime had its odd rituals. Some families swore by onions hung near the bed to ward off illness. Others tucked silver coins under pillows for good luck. You laugh, imagining the mingled scent of fried food and fortune under the quilt. Yet it makes sense. In a world without certainty, small comforts become charms against the dark. You blow out the lamp, the room filling with shadows, and let your body sink into the straw-stuffed mattress. The day has been long, full of dust, sweat, and more than a few awkward laughs, but also full of wonder. The 1880s are neither romantic dream nor endless misery. There's something in between, something recognizably human. And now it's time to let that world fade, to let the sounds of distant fiddles and soft crickets carry you towards sleep. So here you are, stretched out at the close of your long walk through 1880s America. You've tasted its biscuits, felt the sting of its factory soot, bounced on its wagons, and laughed gently at its oddities. And now, as the night deepens, it's time to soften the edges of all those images and let them drift into the distance. Picture the quiet streets again, lamps flickering faintly, their glow reflected in puddles left by a summer rain. Imagine the hush of a farmhouse where the stove has gone dark, embers pulsing faintly like fireflies. Feel the faint creak of a porch swing rocking in the breeze, the scent of hay and wood smoke lingering in the night air. Your shoulders loosen, your breath slows, the noises of the day, machines, gossip, sermons, fiddles, fade one by one until only silence remains, punctuated by the soft sigh of your own breathing. The world shrinks to the size of your quilt, your pillow, the steady rhythm of your heart. You remember the parlor games, the market stalls, the laughter around campfires, and realize they're not demanding anything now. They're just drifting images, floating like lanterns down a river, their glow receding. You don't need to follow. You only need to watch them slip away, smaller and smaller, until the darkness folds gently over everything. So let your eyes close, heavy and sure. Let the weight of the day dissolve, replaced by the soft comfort of rest. The 1880s have given you their stories. Now they give you their quiet. And somewhere beyond the veil of sleep, the fiddles keep playing, the trains keep rolling, and life goes on without asking anything of you. Sweet dreams.